Good afternoon, everybody. Happy to be here with you this afternoon. I'm just gonna give a few minutes for all the participants to enter from the waiting room, and we'll go ahead and get stuff started this afternoon. All right. It looks like we've got most of the people have come in from the waiting room. So we're going to go ahead and get things started. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Dawn Salvucci-Favier from Greenscreens. I am here today with Michael Caney, who I'm sure needs no introduction. But Michael, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself for those who might not know you?
Thanks, Don. Yeah, my name is Michael Caney. I'm the proud Chief Commercial Officer at Highway. Um, little software company that's been in business for a couple of years, and Don and I actually go back before that. I was one of her customers, and we've been friends for a long time. So I'm excited to be able to do this with you today and talk to freight brokers and talk about technology.
Yeah, I think this is a first time for us. So happy to have you as my arm candy today, as we were just saying backstage. So awesome. Well, Michael and I are here to kind of talk to y'all a little bit about, the year that was. We're almost through 2024, RIP 2024. Heading into 2025. We did put some surveys out leading up to this webcast. So we will share some of those results with you and just some of the data, share with you some of the data that both of our companies are seeing from working with many freight brokers in the industry and some of the insights coming out of that data. So with that being said, let's go ahead and hop into it here. So 2024, the year that was, we'll start off with a couple of the survey questions here that we asked you all. So the first question we asked was, as a broker, what was your biggest challenge in 2024? And I'm sure it's no surprise to anybody that, the number one biggest challenge with 48% of the responses was cargo theft and fraud,
Yeah.
followed very closely by revenue growth and stability. And then, along with that, customer retention. And again, not surprisingly, sourcing capacity was just a very, very small concern or challenge for people in 2024. Along with that, we also asked folks what technology investments gave the highest ROI for companies in 2024. And again, not surprisingly, 47% of the respondents said that fraud prevention and compliance tools really drove a high return for them, followed not closely, but behind with automation tools, so booking, dispatch, quoting, communications, then followed by pricing and rate management, and then kind of bringing up the rear is your traditional load tracking and visibility, and then data analytics and business intelligence. So that's kind of the feedback. I think we had about 100 survey responses come into this, so being sourced from you all. But Michael, given that fraud, again, not surprisingly, was to the top of the list, both from a ROI from a technology as well as the biggest concerns. Would love to let you kind of riff on that for a little bit here. So I know we have some slides. Would love to
Yeah.
get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's interesting is that, the other things that we asked about in that survey, Don, are not unimportant anymore. And they took front and center for a long time. And I think it would be interesting if we could go back in time and kind of ask those questions. And I bet you would see some ebb and flow between those tools, right? Is it capacity or is it tracking or is it automation? And I think what the freight market over the last couple of years has taught us is really two things. One, you can't go digital without security. It would have been really weird if we would have started digital payment networks without any security. And if you think about it, we kind of did that. We started Book It Now, and we just kind of we put everything on load boards, and it kind of became Craigslist. Like it just became this free for all of, and so what we did was we created a bunch of attack vectors, and those were exploited. And then the second thing I would say is that it's difficult to automate dirty data. You know this, right? This is your business. You're going to talk about this. but it's really difficult to make great decisions, whether it's training an AI model or just doing some basic machine learning on bad data. And so, the first thing you have to do to get clean data and to be able to build a clean tech stack is you've got to get the bad guys out of the house. And so that's kind of what we've seen for the last couple of years at Highway is like, how can we help brokers build a really efficient tech stack by first like cleaning the house up, right? And so one is like you got to stop the bleeding, you got to stop the theft, and then you can kind of get back to like, all right, can we get back to doing business? Can we get back to building a clean tech stack? Can we get back to doing the innovation that we've all been trying to do for a long time? And just what you're seeing here, just kind of order of magnitude is how bad it got. When I'm not going to read the slide because I don't like reading slides, but you can see the massive amount of attacks that come from a variety of different countries and come brokers in a variety of ways, whether it's their phone, whether it's the point of booking, whether it's a third-party load service, whether it's a motor carrier identity being compromised, so the broker doesn't even know that they're being attacked because they think they're working with a valid motor carrier that's been compromised. And so what we had to spend a couple of years doing is really getting our arms around creating an identity engine that took into account all of these different attack vectors and was able to help brokers respond in real time. So that's kind of been a couple of years for us. I hope we get to talk about making money now. Like maybe we can talk about helping our customers make some money. And so hopefully that's where the market's going.
Yeah, that's great. Michael, just a quick question for you. I mean, how quickly are you guys having to iterate with some of these new screening methods or being able to identify? It feels like every day I'm hearing about,
Yeah.
new ways of people committing fraud, right? So how are
Yeah.
you
I,
guys
I I
managing
mean, I'm not being hyperbolic when I say this. It's almost daily. And so, like, like you run a business that employs machine learning and AI that's adaptive, right? Like every time you get new data from a broker, you're adapting your models daily, right? And our identity engine is the same way. It's out there, it's patented. And so every single day we have to look at data that's coming in and figuring out how our engine has to respond based on the change in attack vectors. There's some noise going around this week about the FMCSA, and I'm happy to say that the FMCSA knows they were compromised because we told them,
Oh,
because
interesting.
we saw it in our data. We saw 300 phone numbers compromised overnight. And
Oh,
so
wow.
like these are the things that we're looking at. These are the things that we're watching for. And we're actually alerting the motor team going, hey, did you know someone changed your phone? And they always say, no, I didn't know that. And so that's kind of the chart that you're seeing here in terms of the growth.
Yeah, so I'm really keying in obviously on this huge increase in identity theft over
Yeah.
September, October. What's the driver behind things like that? How do you guys identify those things?
Yeah. So I think the driving what's really driving the growth in identity theft specifically is when you lock down how easy it is to get a hold of freight in other ways. The only the only way into a broker, especially if it's a highway customer, is to try to impersonate an otherwise legitimate carrier. Try to go get a block of MCs or get a hold just long enough to impersonate that carrier to get a hold of some freight. And because we move so quickly, they have to try to do it in large blocks because they want to steal a lot of freight, Don, right? They don't want to go get one load, right? They're used to being able to steal massive amounts of freight in a short amount of time. The only way for them to do that is to try to impersonate a fairly large block of legitimate carriers really quickly to get a hold of some freight before they get caught. And so we just see massive spikes and compromises in legitimate carrier data.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay. And by the way, for the folks on the phone, we are taking questions. I should have mentioned this at the beginning. If you would like to submit any questions through the chat on Zoom, please do that, and we're happy to take those questions in real time for either Michael or from myself. Um, Great. So let's see. And then I guess this is kind of another view of the same thing here. So some of the top
Yeah.
identity alerts that you guys have seen this year. And again, we're seeing that identity theft really take off there. Stolen assets. That also seems to have peaked quite a bit in the spring, summer months. Do you want to talk a little bit about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. So there's actually if you look at around that time in the summer, that's when we started. We talk about responses, right? You kind of see it trend back down. That's when we started building logic to account for potentially sold MCs. They're not legitimately sold on, so it's not like you can go look at the Secretary of State and find a sale because it's not a legitimate sale. But that's when we started noting patterns in the data that is what happens when someone sells their MC. And so oftentimes when you look at our data and you look at the ebbs and flows, what it really is it's us finding something and responding. They pivot and come back and attack a different way. It's an all-day war game for our team.
Interesting. Well, they sure keep getting more creative and more clever with the ways that they're
Yeah.
trying to defraud the industry. So, well, Michael, I appreciate those insights into what has happened in 2024 from a fraud perspective, and we'll talk more about, going forward 2025, what can companies do. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about, economy and rates. And as we saw, revenue and customer retention was a big challenge for a lot of people. This first graphic that I'm going to walk through with you all, this is something that actually we publish monthly. So this is our October monthly market trend report. If you guys are interested in seeing this on a regular basis, you can access it or subscribe to receive it on a monthly basis at greenscreens.ai/trends. But what we're looking here, and obviously I don't need to tell anybody on this call that 2024 was yet another really tough year for rate compression and therefore for a lot of companies for revenue. We're going to take a deeper look at revenue in kind of the second half of this presentation as we talk about 2025 and what companies can do. But I want to frame it up with kind of a look at the rate side for a moment. So this graphic here is really baselining the current market as of the end of October to a specific point in time. The specific point in time being on this left chart here is the first half of 24. So comparing, year to date or second half to date to what the first half baseline was. And then on the right side of the screen, comparing it, doing the year over year comparison. So this 0% line here, and this is just an explanation for those of you who aren't familiar with this, is really representing the average spot market rate for that time period. So in this case being the 0% line is representing for the first half of the year. The 0% line here is for a year ago, right? Is really baselining the up and down cycle to that time period or comparatively to that time period. But both are telling a very similar story. And this is a pretty effective way of telling us when the market is changing, right? So as you know, a lot of people were claiming that by this time the market would have turned. Clearly, the data is not yet showing us that it has happened. But what we will look at in over the course of our time together today is that there are some bright spots. Now with the election behind us, we'll discuss some more of those a little bit later on. And there's a bit more optimism happening on the business side, even though there continues to be some pressure on rates. Just to look at this a little bit differently, Greenscreens, we've recently created our own index, right? So I want to be really clear here. These numbers, this 164.8 or 191.6 is not a rate per mile, right? This is really a proprietary method of aggregating data across all the loads and then normalizing that data for length of haul and other regional abnormalities, right? Things like fuel and things like that. So again, telling a very similar story. I think the bright spots, though, is if you look in van and reefer, we are starting to see some month-over-month improvements, albeit them very slight, right? That we had not previously seen. Now, you could argue that it's seasonality, right? It's normal seasonality, but seasonality is also something that for the first time in 2024, we've actually kind of seen return to more of a norm, right? So since pre-pandemic, we haven't really seen any seasonal norms, and we're starting to see a little bit more of that normalcy return to our cycles here. whereas year over year, we're still slightly down. Michael, anything that you wanted to add to that from what you're hearing from being out there in the market or your experience in the market?
Yeah, no, I think what's interesting is there is, if I'm understanding you correctly, what you're saying is that the seasonality is emblematic of the past, right? It's overall lower than like a prior benchmark, but the seasonality is returning. And I would say that like we're hearing that from some customers. You know, the issue that I think brokers are facing, even with some return to seasonality or some moderate, kind of sporadic price improvement, is that they haven't clawed back from all of the pain. Like the well was just dug so deep, Don, that it was hard to kind of get
Yeah.
out of it. And so, nobody's excited yet. And the other thing I think we're seeing is that companies are, the implication for technology investment is that they know they have to invest in technology. They're being very careful. It's like dollars are just so precious right now. So it's interesting. In prior freight cycles, you and I've been through a few of these, Don. People would just not spend and then spend and not spend and spend, right? It was like on and off. And now I think that a lot of brokers have gotten savvy and said, hey, we can't stop investing. We can't just completely go to the foxhole, but we've got to be really careful about how we do that. And I think and I may be creeping on our presentation, I can't remember all of our slides, but I think what's really interesting is that what people are realizing is that they do not want to go back to throwing bodies at the problem. I think that's what we're
100%.
seeing is that brokers are saying, hey, even if it does come back, hiring 100 people or 10 people, depending on the relative size of your brokerage, we're not doing that again. I think that is one thing that we won't see. I don't think we'll see the return of the body shop the way we did before.
I agree with that. And I think the survey results for the 2025 focus areas somewhat
Mm.
reflect that as well. So we will talk about those in a moment. I have just a couple more things on 2024 rates I want to cover. And then I do have a couple questions that came in on the chat from Michael. So hold tight. We will get to those. Just a couple more things I want to share with you guys here from a data perspective. One of the other things that we look at, and this is generally a really good indicator of when a market turn is coming, is the comparison between contract and spot rates. And again, this is an index. This isn't looking at a rate per mile, but it is one of the, that normalized index that, takes out factors like distance and regional differences. But what you would generally see is when spot market rates are above the contract rates, it's generally an indicator of tighter capacity or a stronger market. And then when the spot rates are below contract, that's an indicator of a softer market. And you can kind of see how that has played out really over the past few years. But as you can see for van and reefer, the market peak, was back here in January of 22, the bottom being in April in 23. And then the contract and the spot rates then kind of remained pretty aligned, right, for the first half of 24. But if we kind of look in, and I've zoomed in here on for the van rates, you can see going back to about June of this year, the spot markets rates have eked slightly ahead of the contract rates. And it has remained there really since June. So this pattern is really starting to look a little bit more similar to kind of some of the pre-pandemic patterns that we would see. So again, as I said earlier, bright spots, not quite willing to call it a trend yet, but they're green shoots, if you will, that are indicating kind of a return to more, and I'm going to use air quotes around normal, right? Because a lot of us, I think, have forgotten what normal is. But again, some of those green shoots. And then the last thing I'll share with you guys around rates, and then we'll take your questions from Michael and then come back around and talk about 2025 and what is shaping the future here. It's just something else that we really like to look at to help our customers really understand what is happening in the market. And this is looking at the daily prediction bias, right? So if you think of bias as a means of understanding the impact of things that are not predictable, right? So we're using machine learning and we're predicting what the market is going to do based on the data. But as everybody knows, there are events that just are not predictable. We can't predict what those are. So this is kind of a daily gauge of, hey, how off was, what was the impact of this particular event or on a day-to-day basis? And you can kind of see here like the impact of Helene, right? When this bias goes up, it means that the algorithm is over predicting rates. And when it goes down, it means that we're under predicting rates. So you can kind of see from the timeline here, Helene hit, it was delayed a little bit, and then we started under predicting. Now, mind you, it's not by a lot, right? It's by a percentage, but this is just something that we're looking at, and also a means for the algorithm to self-correct itself, right? To say, hey, we're under predicting, we need to adjust for that. You can see that it levels out. Milton was then less profound, right? And then you can even see some of the impact felt by election day. So again, this is just another
Mhm.
tool that we're enabling for people to get a better understanding of, what is the market doing in more real time, right? Rather than looking backwards and saying what happened last week, because then
Mhm.
it's too late.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm bouncing around a little bit here. I'm going to switch gears. We had two questions come in for you, Michael. The first one is, speaking of purchased MC numbers, have you found a benchmark for carriers with updated emails or it says PHE, maybe phone?
Yeah, I'm reading the question. He's asking about emails and phones, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then it looks like the second question is a follow-up question, basically, Don, right? Which is, um, have we found where the change in phone or email is legitimate, right? And so there's a couple things being conflated there, right? One is, so let's just talk about contact information. Okay, so contact information changes can function in a variety of ways, right? You can change, they can be legitimate. You can turn one dispatch service on, turn another one on, fire dispatcher. You can have a change because you sold your MC, quote unquote, sold your MC, and you can have a change because it was fraudulent. The bottom line is it's a change. So there was something at a point in time, and it changed. And so here's what I want to highlight. We announced this today, but this all goes back to identity and how you deal with changes in identity or the facets associated to someone's identity, right? There's multiple things that go into someone's identity profile. There's actually something called the National Institute of Standards and Technology for Digital Identity Guidelines, right? We actually have a certification um, that where we're the only industry provider that has a patented engine and we meet those standards. And so here's how I'm going to answer Greg's question. Anytime there's a material change, Highway has the ability to alert the original user, the entity, of a potential change, right? And what happens is the user, the entity, has to heal. So the way Highway works is just like when you use a single sign-on experience into anything. You scan a QR code and you sign into your Netflix account and you sign into your Amazon account. What we do here, this is bank level security. We have a SOC 2 Type 2 designation. So we're using the same standards that your bank uses. And so it's about allowing the changer to prove that, to come and verify their identity. And so it kicks the process off again. And so typically within that healing process, you learn whether it's legitimate or not. Right. So the second thing I'll mention to Greg is that oftentimes when we pull the thread on a change, we can see that bad actor was trying to make changes on a number of different entities, right? And so there's not really a benchmark in terms of, hey, every time there's this kind of a change, it's a good thing or a bad thing. It just doesn't work that way. You have to look at the behavior that's going on around that change. It's I wish I was a product person like Don, so I could answer that more intelligently. But I would say it's hard. It's real hard. But that's why you have to build technology solutions to do this. You can't look at a list anymore of guidelines. You can't look at a website and try to make a decision. It's too difficult.
Yeah. So I'm going to go off script a little bit here because it kind of Greg's questions triggered something. And I know that we talk about you guys and your ability to identify fraud and identify the bad actors, but through social media, mostly LinkedIn lately, I've seen instances where Highway employees or Highway as a company have actually helped a carrier who was unjustly being, blocked, right, from
Yep.
from brokers. can we talk about that a little bit? Because I think that's really cool.
Yeah,
Because I
yeah,
think
I can. So
sometimes you get a bad rap, or not
yeah,
you, but in general of, hey, bad rap because you're keeping me from getting business. But I'd
yeah.
like to highlight that too.
So it's interesting. So there's really two things. So when you see the noise, when you see the carrier that says it's crying victim, really, oh, poor me, right? So sometimes it's legitimate. Like we may have, over factored on something, and somebody might have gotten scooped up, right? Like, and we can generally fix it pretty quickly. Um, Oftentimes what you will see though, and I will talk to carriers and say, hey, like there's a guy that I loaded him when I was a broker, Don. I remember the name of this company. I had to get him on the phone, and when I talked to him, I remember I was making a grilled cheese for my kids on a Saturday. I'm talking to this guy and I'm like, hey man, I know you. Like I remember loading you. But dude, you can't log into Highway from 3 countries with 3 different email addresses and use the same name,
Yeah.
right? And one of them is Jimmy Fallon. All right. And he's like, well,
Red
I actually
flag.
have a Jimmy Fallon that works for me. And I'm like, okay, but I need you to understand something. In Highway, there are hundreds of Peter Parkers and Bruce Waynes and Jimmy Fallons. Like there is a thing that bad actors do. And when you look like people that do bad things, I have to slow you down and make sure you're not a bad guy. So here's the tip. Stop looking like people that do bad things. And so a lot of times what we have to do is say, like, look, man, look, we are in the truth business. And and oftentimes what happens, well, here's actually what did happen, Don. We just changed it overnight. Like overnight, we came on the scene and said, you can't operate in the gray anymore. And there were a lot of things that were acceptable for a long time. We just did our best with, right? Like, like, like the FMC lets carriers, have a business operating out of a Staples. Like, I don't know how we got there, but evidently that's a thing that we just let people do. Like that, right? And so what we did overnight was, hey, you can't operate that way anymore. And it just takes time, right? Carriers have to kind of learn how to go in and fix those ills because now here's the other thing that happens. So that's kind of like legitimate identity management profile. But here's the other thing that happens. Sometimes my customers don't let the software do the work. They kind of want to go in and play detective and do things. And I don't override a freight broker's rules. So sometimes what happens is a freight broker has had a negative event and they're so scared that they just way overcook what's going on with a carrier. And so like a carrier can have a valid identity in Highway and have 50 broker contracts. And one particular broker will say, hey, I can't load you because of Highway. And we're like, hey, time out. That's the broker's rule. They made a
Yeah.
decision based on something. Man, I can't help you. I get it. You got to, I'm happy to get on the phone with the broker. I'm happy to try to help. Does that make sense? Also, there's
Yep.
2 different things going on. Right.
Yeah.
And
No,
and and
absolutely.
a broker's easy thing is to go kind of like, and we all do this, right? Blame somebody else. So they'll just
Yeah.
say, hey, it's Highway. Oh, it's not Highway, it's your decision. And you can make that decision. But like, so there's kind of 2 different categories to get carriers kind of kind of put out. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah, I love that. No, and I appreciate that explanation because I just found that interesting the couple times that I've seen it happening, playing out live on LinkedIn, and thought it was pretty cool that you guys are, yes, you're identifying the bad actors, but you're also helping those that are not truly bad actors figure out
Yeah.
how to not be identified as such. So I
Yeah.
think that's really cool. All right. So we're about halfway through our time here today. Let's see, there's another question that just popped in. So there are carriers who are starting business and they have to share office space with some other carriers or warehouse in the same location, just different suites. We have had issues where we were blocked because the broker was saying you're doing business in the same address and it means we're affiliated with them. How does Highway help mitigate those situations?
Yeah. So I mean, you can call our support line. And again, it's not you need to be really clear. Highway doesn't block you. Highway will tell the truth about an association. Right. And like that's sometimes all it is. So here's the way that we're trying to help the market think about things. There's a difference between like noise and signal, right? And so what I would say if I was a freight broker, and I was for a very long time, when I look at those things, it's a legitimate question to ask. Okay. It's not a block. Right now, if a broker chooses to block you, I'm going to tell you right now, like Highway doesn't make a decision to like we don't score, right? Like we're it's an identity issue. It's fraud. You are real or you're not real. Everything else is a broker's decision matrix about service, their freight, etc. But here's what I will tell you: 9 times out of 10, when there's a double brokering event, people are sharing something. They're sharing an address, they're sharing office space, they're sharing dispatch services, right? There's information being exchanged about freight, loads, etc. And then you lose track of what carrier it goes on. Now, whoever asked the question, I'm not at all saying that you would do that. I'm saying that almost every double brokering event, that's a common thing. Okay, so if you're a broker that needs to secure your customer's freight, you're going to ask that question. Now, there's a variety of things you can do to heal that. I'm not going to unpack it all on this call. If you email service@highway.com, I can absolutely help you. Call me, happy to help you. But you need to know that that exists and people want to ask that question.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think this is really more of a follow-up comment from someone in our audience and a question, and it says carriers need to choose wisely who they are sharing a location with. You need to know
Yeah.
if you're sharing a location with other bad actors, and I think that's a very true statement of doing your own diligence and know who your neighbors are. Essentially, would you buy a house next door to the
Yeah.
crack house? No, you would not, right?
I
So,
mean, look, Don, like it's as simple as like, I mean, I'm from Texas, right? I eat a lot of barbecue. And if you go to a barbecue restaurant, like a couple hours later, like your shit smells like the smokehouse. Like people know, like, oh, you had barbecue for lunch. Like if you stand too close to a fire, you're going to smell like smoke. Like, like if you're a motor carrier, like that's your responsibility. Like only like that is your responsibility to represent who you are. Like you're asking brokers to give you freight that's worth 100, 200, $300,000. They're going to ask. Oh, by the way, in an environment where their stuff gets stolen all the time, like think about who your neighbors are.
exactly. Exactly. Yes, and I just got my Philly roots just get called out when I said, "Would you buy the house next door to the crack house?" And the response I got was, "That's how you know you're from Philly." So, yes,
Oh
absolutely, Christine. I appreciate that. So, all right, one more question for Michael, and then we're gonna take a look at
my
2025.
goodness.
I know you're just being
I know, I
bombarded
know. All
here.
right, let's talk about the dispatch service. Okay, this
It's
is
the
always a favorite one.
dispatch
This is always a
service.
favorite one. So if you are a dispatch service and you tell the truth, and there are people that are going to say, "Why would I allow dispatch services in? They're all bad." Look, again, not my decision. That's a motor carrier's decision to work with a dispatch service. And it's a broker's decision on whether they work with a motor carrier that uses a dispatch service. And here's what I would tell you: we have a way for a dispatch service to be legitimately registered in highway, and any of that information has to be verified by the underlying motor carrier who has also passed the identity protocols. So we have to know your dispatch service, and you can manage. We can see the associated MCs. It's very, very clean. What happens is when you lie, when you try to come back and represent, like our tech catches. So there's absolutely the question I would answer, the answer I would give to a multitude of questions is, if a motor carrier is willing to walk in the light about their address, about what they're doing, there are multiple ways to be represented in highway and do a lot of business. If you try to operate in the shadows, we will tell people and they will not do business with you. And if you are a dispatch service and you want to learn how to operate legitimately, call Adam Wingfield. He's a partner of Highway. He will tell you how to do it. Like we have a great experience for you. So there's a way to do all of this, but you can't fib. It'll tell little white lies. So that's what I'd say about dispatch services. Let's talk about something positive.
Yeah, let's talk about something positive. So what is shaping the industry in 2025? So again, we did our little family feud survey. We surveyed 100 people and the top four answers are on the board. The first question is for Q1 2025, what is going to be the key focus of your freight brokerage business? And 51%, not surprisingly, said growing revenue and expanding their customer base, followed by strengthening of carrier relationships and network reliability, adopting technology, which is key. The percentage is low, but I'm going to tie this all back together here in a minute, and as well as reducing operational cost and improving efficiency. So that was the first question we asked about where businesses see the need to focus in 2025. The other question that we asked was areas that they're looking to develop or transform, right, in 2025. And the first one, and this goes back to what Michael was saying earlier about, hiring 100 people and having a kind of sweatshop mentality. 31% of the respondents said investing in talent training and workforce development. 25% was expanding their services to differentiate. So all of these are pretty close together. 24 adapting to market changes and economic conditions because we are beginning to see the tides shifting there, right? So I think that's very important. And then 20% is improving risk management and fraud prevention efforts. Michael, anything in these survey results that surprises you?
No, not at all. I mean, I think what's interesting is that, when we look at 2024, the number one thing was fraud prevention, right? And now you have like, okay, we have done some of that, and it's never done, right? Most large brokers have hired us and said, okay, one of our commitments is like we're going to own the outcome on everything we can do. So, okay, I've got a partner that's now, wearing the white hat and looking out for me all the time. All right, now I can kind of go back to like, okay, now how do I improve my business? How do I begin thinking about, and I think what you're seeing dovetails really well. Like, I got to invest in talent, and I've got to think about resources to help them do that. And what's really interesting, like when you were reading those survey results, I thought of like Journey with Will Jenkins. I thought of like Sync Training with Nick Dangles, like Learn to Win, which is a company that Soap Creek's invested in. Like you're seeing people go, hey, I don't have to build my own proprietary training program, right? I'm not going to just go hire an additional 20% of my workforce and have them shadow and sit with people and hope, right? We're trying to be a little more reasonable about how we develop. And then I think there's tools that are saying, hey, maybe I don't need to hire as many people. Maybe there's some tools that can just help the people I have make better decisions.
Right.
Right. Because
Right.
we're at the stage of the game where like that's what we're really paying humans to do is just make decisions.
Yes, absolutely. And look, as an AI technology vendor, I really advocate that it's not a man versus machine, it's a man
Yeah.
plus machine. The AI technology is there to make the human more efficient, to help them make better decisions more quickly, but more importantly, to free up the human's time to do the things that computers can't do, right?
Yeah.
To form better customer relationships, to form better carrier relationships, to do a little bit of deeper diligence on the recommendations that are coming from tools like
Yeah.
Highway, right? There is technology, like you said, sync logistics training that can help, take the training burden off of the human and enable that. And that's why, we kind of put together this table that cross references, both the business imperatives that were surfaced in that survey and the technology enablers that, from where the ROI came from and things like that, that really help to enable these business imperatives. And it's pretty much across the board, right?
Yeah.
Automation tools are going to help with all of these things, including that investment in your talent and your training and developing your workforce. Automate those mundane tasks, right? Nobody wants to be doing check calls anymore, right? Those are the things that we should seek to automate. You know, automate the things that can be automated so your people can focus on differentiating, right, from your
Yeah.
competitors and offering extreme service and things like that. What would you add to that, Michael? Anything?
Yeah, I think what I was thinking about as you were talking about this is, so I remember when you and I first started doing this early, and I was doing a little like little early advisory. We used to talk about the over the wall, the gopher pricing methodology. Hey, what do you guys pay on Dallas and Memphis, right? Like,
Yeah.
and even if you think about training, right, just training. I went for fun and I dug out one of my old training decks from one of my old brokerages, and like I can eliminate like 2/3 of it because I don't need to teach people how to price anymore. Right? Like I need to teach them how to interpret prices and make decisions and maybe like look at a green screens rate with some subjectivity, like maybe think a little bit,
Yeah.
right? Like I'm one of those guys. It's like, hey, nothing does it perfect always, but I can teach people to go much faster because I can put a green screens rate in front of them. I don't need them to look at 6 websites and phone a friend to set up a carrier, right? I no longer need to have a check load for a FedEx load versus a food and bev load because highway classifications are just going to do that for you, right? Like all these things that we just have to teach people, you don't have to teach them anymore. Like you
Right.
just, but there is software that does this. You have to teach them how to use the technology and adopt it. But so much of
Right.
that granularity that we used to spend hours teaching people, you don't have to. So what that means is if you take the same amount of training time and you focus on actually developing people and like their ability to think and solve problems and interact with customers and service motor carriers, you should have a much better business because
Yeah.
you don't have to task train them. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. And think about the technology really as a decision support tool, not
Yep.
necessarily as a replacement. And I think that is absolutely huge, absolutely huge. And you know, and all of these things at the end of the day are about revenue enablement, right? Better carrier relationships, more
Yeah.
efficient network, you know, better trained workforce. It's all about revenue enablement, right? And I think
Yep.
that's really what folks are really focused on today. So I want to drill into a little bit more data because I am a data geek right here, and then we can kind of wrap things up with, you know, what are kind of the people who are winning, the leaders, what are the winners doing to win
Hmm.
right now? So again, this is looking back at 2023, 2024 for data mostly. And look, as a company, you've heard a lot in the industry, you know, make some really bold predictions about when the market is going to turn and how much it's going to turn. And we're pretty hesitant about doing that, right?
There's a tombstone meme out there somewhere. I mean, I think,
Somewhere,
you
yeah.
know,
Yeah,
somebody's got
something out there.
some pretty bold predictions.
Yeah, and we're pretty hesitant because look, if a year ago, I think most of us would have told you that the market was going to turn by now, right? And it didn't. And I think we are in unprecedented times. But as I keep saying, there are green shoots and there are bright spots that are
Yep.
signals to us that, you know, the end of this down cycle is coming. We're past the election, all of those things. So you know, I think our belief and what the data is showing us that there's enough of those signals out there. You know, again, I mentioned the summer seasonality and the spot rates are finally rising above the contract rates to say that there is going to be a slow, steady improvement in the market over the coming months. Though we will never see a return to
Yeah.
21, 22. I think maybe more likely that pre-pandemic norm. Oops, I went backwards instead of forwards. There we go. Um, you know, looking ahead, much more of the forecasting is this kind of rinse and repeat, right? From
Yep.
last year. We get out of Q2 next year, but I think the what a normal cycle actually looks like is more like 27, 2018, right? Post 2016 election. Um, so while a lot of the economists are pretty bullish going into next year, that you know, and the data is supporting better rates and better volumes. But I think what is interesting here in the data itself is obviously cost and revenue have moved almost identically in line with
Hmm.
each other. That's that chart on the left-hand side here. The good news, though, is that volume is up, and I've heard this
Hmm.
from a couple sources. If you look at year over year, you know, volume increases. If you look at to 23 compared to 24, the volume is there, and that
Hmm.
margins overall, although they're compressed, right, they've held pretty steady for the past 6 or 7 months, which is
Yep.
again is good news. And I think that, and I'd love your opinion on this, is that um, the accessibility and the adoption of some of the more advanced technology solutions in AI and automation and business intelligence and workforce development at every tier of the market is kind of a big driver to that.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
On on the workforce development piece.
Well, just on the fact, well, that, you know, the margins are staying pretty steady, the volume
Yeah.
is up. I guess this is another way to look at it. I think it gets a little bit more interesting as we start slicing that data and we look at it by size of company, right? So we're saying here
Yep.
company size is much less influence than it has in the past, right?
Yeah.
Particularly over the last 12 months. So if you look going back to 2022, there was a much bigger spread on each of these metrics, cost, revenue, and margin between the large companies and the small companies. But you've seen as we've gone into 2024, that spread is really narrowed, right? And
Yeah.
again, I think that's the more availability and accessibility of the technology. And I think
Yeah.
also there's generally more knowledge disparity in a market when there's more revenue to be made, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That's fair.
what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. What I think where my mind goes is, um, let's say that the cohorts are tracking closer together and because they are in your data, right?
Yep.
Um, what doesn't exist in the smaller company is the war chest, right? And so the differences that I saw up close and personal, like especially when I was running the consulting business full time before Highway, and even when my partner was running it, you know, when I moved to Highway, we saw a lot of mid-market and small broker data. And the difference was often that just their cost basis didn't go down, right? So let's say all these things are true. What's not here is what is the broker's cost basis of just people, payroll, like and then the other thing that happens, and in a lot of small companies, Don, is the boat payment doesn't go away. A lot of the small companies, it's their lifestyle business, and I don't mean that pejoratively. I just mean it like their lifestyle businesses, right? Like
Yep.
it's how the owners live, and so they didn't think about a war chest, right? They didn't think about sitting on cash. And so what happens is you had a lot of companies that thought, I'm going to double down and invest, and they weren't savvy with it. They used credit lines, they used some creative debt, and then when it tanked, they weren't like the larger, more mature companies that could weather that. And I think that's probably really the story that's not represented here. Is like when you look at margin and volume, it's how were those individual companies operating, right? And did they
Yeah.
have any operating discipline? And so I think what you're going to see is a return to discipline. Like freight brokerage hasn't changed in 30 years. Like you build capacity, you create density, you sell against that capacity that you develop in the long tail to a shipper, right? Like I just think the post and pray heyday, I think people finally got religion over that. Like
Yep.
it's not coming back. I mean, I don't know if that makes sense, kind of, if that answers your question, but
No,
that's where
it
my
it
head
makes
goes. I kind of put my operator hat back on and I'm thinking, like, what was it like, when I ran that
yes.
little, $20 million business that we grew? And
Makes
what I
perfect
said was
sense.
like, I remember the CEO was like, we need to invest. I was like, no, 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 no. We need to stack paper because when it comes down, like it's coming down, it's going to come down really hard. And,
Yeah.
luckily that last business I ran was sitting on a bunch of cash because we saved it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and speaking of that, right? So you were talking about how is the business run. This is just one more interesting slice of the data, right? So the last slice was looking at size of company, but this slice is really looking at the data, both margin spread and revenue per load for it's comparing the overall community to the top 25th percentiles from a revenue performance perspective, right? And I think what gets, oops, sorry, I did it again. What becomes really interesting here is when you look at the top 25th percentile performers, going back to your point about how is that business run, what investments have they made, um, the spread for the average revenue per load becomes much wider, first of all, for the top 25th percentile, which and this is in our customer base, by the way. So we have over
Yep.
200 customers. That top 25th percentile indicates, to me, more dynamic pricing strategies being adopted. But I think if we put a focus on the median lines here, so the blue line and the orange line that kind of connects these, as the market was coming down, and I'm looking at the revenue per load chart here,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
folks, as the market was coming down, you can see they're overlapping, right? They're almost there. But I
mm-hmm.
think operating in this new market has really forced a lot of companies to relook at the way that they're operating. And since then, the difference between the top 25th percentile and the overall kind of community has really separated, right? Particularly
Yep.
over the past year, to the extent of about 3 to 5% more revenue per load, or about 2% higher profit margin at the median, right? Obviously, this is representing kind of the full spreads there. So I thought this was a really interesting slice. And again, when we talk about 25th percentile, that is, those are kind of the top performers from a revenue growth perspective, right?
Yeah.
Or a margin, sorry, margin perspective. So sorry, and did you want to add something to that?
No, I mean, what I think about is like, um, in different market cycles, particularly in market cycles where there's an abundant, a lot of freight capacity, the top 25th percentile, their efficiency is really going to show up a lot because they book freight, right? And then like when there's a glut of capacity and a lack of freight, when that demand curve changes, like everybody's an expert at booking freight, right? Like everybody's smart.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think you see that changing. What would be really interesting, which would be a different study in your data, is how much consolidation took place. Because I think a lot of times, probably what you might see, particularly in your customer base, is shippers consolidate. You see a lot of brokers that they lost freight because shippers didn't want 20 brokers, they wanted 10, right? Or they didn't want 50,
Right.
they wanted 20, whatever. And so sometimes what changes those metrics is a consolidation of load volume. I think. But when we think about top performers, the thing I've been thinking about the last three slides is Don, there's a difference in mindset of certain leaders, right? And you can pair it back to like abundance versus scarcity, right? And how you think about something. And when I was consulting, and the market was a little tougher, I stole a line from Drew Wilkerson. Shout out to Drew Wilkerson, CEO of RXO. Um, and I opened every engagement with it. And it was like the mantra for every little like turnaround or growth deal I did, which was he says there's a playbook for every market. And so when you kind of ride the social media narrative of like trying to predict the future, is it going to go down? Is it going to go up? And there's a whole segment of the market that's like waiting for it to come back. And what top performers say is there's a playbook for every market. Like you have to know the playbook for the market cycle that you're in and stay out of the noise and the clickbait. So here's what I'll tell you. Top performers, they stay out of the clickbait. They don't buy shiny objects. They run their business. They don't try to run somebody else's business. They don't try to copy their buddy. The brokers that went out of business, they were driven by the clickbait narratives and they bought shiny objects and they tried to do what their buddy did and they didn't run their business. And when we look at top performers, they don't behave that way from a leadership perspective.
Right. Right. Totally agree. Totally agree. All right, folks. So we have about 9 minutes left here. Happy to take questions. I think we're just going to wrap things up here with, well, first of all, as we look at that top 25th percentile, what are the key behaviors that we see in that top 25th percentile? And I think a lot of it goes along with everything that Michael just said and things that we had discussed earlier. And that is that these companies are generally buying a little bit better through establishing relationships with their carriers and network efficiency, right? Carrier reuse, reliability, weeding out the bad actors, right? They're committed to automating the process that drive their efficiency metrics, right? Number of loads booked per day per rep, automating the customer quoting because you can't win what you don't quote on, right?
Yeah,
Those are a lot of the things, but also being able to measure those things. They're focused on differentiating with shippers through service reliability again and efficient, strong relationships, which are not going to be developed to a point you made earlier through a post and pray mentality, right? We're kind of getting back to basics and fundamentals and being more relationship driven, leveraging the data and business intelligence, right, to adapt more quickly to the market and understanding. And then finally, Michael, you and I talked a little bit about this as we were preparing for this, is technology is not one size fits all. And I think there's been a big proliferation of really good best of breed, but very specialized technology
yeah,
that has come into our space over the past 7+ years or so, 5 to 7 years.
yeah,
And I think, again, what we're seeing in these top performers is that they have established a kind of an integrated ecosystem of technology
yeah,
tools that are designed to help them with revenue enablement. And that was a key point that you made in our
yeah.
discussions. Would you like to add to that at all?
Yeah, that's exactly where my mind was going. I would say what top performers are doing is um, they're looking to use less vendors, but what they're doing is they're working with those of us that will play well with each other. And those vendors that are the older monoliths, I want to be all things to all people, or the vendors are like, hey, any new person is a threat, and we're gonna sue the customer, sue like weird things, though, like really strange things, right? That we've seen. Like, why would you do that? You don't sue your customer. That's kind of a bad idea. But like there's just kind of a way that things work. And so what we're seeing is like something simple, easy that we did, like our capacity on tap integration, right? Like brokers have screen fatigue. Some of the stuff that we're doing with the AI agents, we're like, yeah, bring it. Like, I don't do AI agents. Like, I'll help you do that. And so I think what savvy customers are doing is getting they're getting their vendors to the table and saying, "Hey, here's the solution that I need. How will you guys work together?" For those of us that I think live in this century, we're like, "Yeah, that's a great idea. We should probably do that because everybody gets stickier, everybody wins, right?" And the dinosaurs just kind of whittle away.
Agree. Agree. Well said. All right, we have a couple questions for you. One of them is from AJ, asking if you could give a 60-second rundown on your new load lock product.
Oh, AJ, you should know better. Are you just setting me up? Here's the view of high level.
What, that you can't
Um,
say anything in 60 seconds? Is that what he should know
yeah,
better?
that's it. Yeah, he should know that. Like, so the future of compliance is load level compliance. So what load lock does is it takes the identity services and the verification of a motor carrier and it puts it on every single load. So with load lock, you can know in real time whether a carrier is in compliance for that load, from like a vetting, insurance, performance standpoint, and you can know if they actually have the necessary equipment and where that equipment is. So that's what load lock does. And it's
Fantastic.
all
Awesome.
automated. It's all automated. No user interventions necessary.
Awesome. And then next question, what advice can you give to a carrier to become better? Any advice from a former broker and identity guru in the industry, and also having knowledge of so much data? What two things can you tell a small carrier to do so they become better and more profitable in the industry?
Man, the thing I would say for a small carrier is if you're a small carrier, and I'm not just saying this because like I'm not trying to prop a friend up, but like work with a guy like Adam, like work with somebody that has run fleets that will help you understand like your P&L, what velocity is, what yield is, how do you build that on a one truck and grow up to 10 trucks. The second thing I would say is like have a few friends and keep them close, right? Pick two or three brokers that are going to really help you optimize your cash flow. So if you're a small carrier, everything is about your cash flow. Do not go shopping for the best rate on the load board because when you move around a lot, like you're sending out more invoices, your factors eating you alive if you have a bad factor, like it just you're creating noise, right? So if you're a small business, like it's all about turning the noise down out of your system. Pick a few brokers that are going to pay you really quickly, that are going to load you consistently. You can work with somebody like Adam or somebody in his category that will help you understand your P&L. Like you are running a business, even if you only have one truck, and think like a business owner and stay out of the Facebook forums that just make you the victim. Stay off of those.
Awesome. And I would just add to that, as we talk to broker customers, there is a real thirst out there within a lot of brokers to better understand your costs and your needs, right? So again, it
Yeah.
comes back to relationships, making it less transactional. Again, the whole post and pray mentality, but forming those relationships with, a true partnership with some of your brokers. There are a lot of them out there that want to know what your needs are, what your cost structures are, how it can be a win for both of you because at the end of the day, they want relationships as well. Okay, a couple more questions coming in here. Well, one is a congratulations from AJ. He said under 30 seconds. Well done. Steve Hernandez, congrats on the Highway Identity Engine. It's established the industry's first conformance to the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, digital identity guidelines, as you were saying earlier. So congratulations on that. And then the first quarter outlook for Greenscreens. So I'm assuming this question means from a market rate perspective. As I said, I think it's a slow, steady rebound, right? Is what we're expecting here. I think we're going to continue to see the green shoots. I think there's a lot more optimism post-election. I think there's a couple things, economic indicators, PPI, CPI, housing starts, right? A lot of those things are starting to point in the right direction. So we agree with the sentiment out there that the market is improving, though I think we're a little bit um, hesitant to say the freight recession is over, though. I think a slow, steady improvement over the next couple quarters is kind of my as about as bold as I'm willing to be right now, because I was a lot bolder a year ago and I was wrong. So um, we'll leave it at that. So let's see. There's no more questions. We have 2 minutes left. If anybody wants to get one last question in, please do that. I just want to call out a couple of our customers here, going back, kind of wrapping this all up. Just examples of two really great, mid-sized companies that have really made a commitment to Two things, technology and relationships, right? And I think that's really what is driving these companies forward. Cooler Logistics, they're fairly new brokerage, but they've committed to getting back to basics and really, back to their brokerage roots and focusing on having the right technology and the right relationships. And then Great Lakes, right? Focusing on establishing a tech stack that is built for who they want to be, not who they are. Right. Or
Yep.
who they expect to be, not who
Yeah.
they are at the time, and really seamlessly integrating what is going to be most impactful and simple, not only for their customers, but also for their carriers and for their employees. So
Yeah.
kind of close with that. I will close with Michael. Thank you so much for your time,
No,
your
thank you, Don. Thanks for being a,
expertise, and
yeah.
your friendship and your partnership. And
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
thank you to everybody who joined us, and for those of you that hung on to the bitter end. So appreciate y'all. Have a great rest of your 24, and here's to 25 being a better year for all of us. So cheers.